What would you have done if he had said, "I want to stay"?
He would have been back.
He would
And
have been back.
that's why we were going to wait and, give him the time that he needed, So when he contacted me on Tuesday morning, and we knew we were going to talk at some point during the week, we always do. You get away, whether it's being eliminated from, it's the first time we hadn't been in the postseason and been eliminated or won the World Series. But he contacted me on Tuesday morning and said, "Hey, could we meet?" And of course, and we met, and he just told me, he's like, basically what he told you guys. And we just talked through it. And look, we had, he alluded to this obviously and talked about it, but we had this conversation 3 years earlier, and we didn't since, but we win the World Series in
Top five receivers in college football are.
Jesus.
Hey, Buck, Zion. Okay. Uh, I know that voice. Um, so we had that conversation 3 years ago. Win the World Series in 21, win the 101 games, first time the franchise had won 100 games in over 20 years. And we approached him about an extension. And, Sneddy's, I'm here, I want to be here, all that stuff. But hey, how long do you want to keep doing this? What do you want to do? And just, the floor is yours, right? What was it? 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. 5 divisions in a row at that time. A World Series title, a 100-win season coming off. Harris, Strider, Grissom just come up. Runway, everything looks great. Guys are signed. We signed a lot of those guys in 22. And what are you thinking? And he said, I think 3 years is a good amount of time. I'll be 70 at that time. And he said, okay, well, what happens next? And obviously Bobby had the stroke. And, look, you're going to be part of this thing. And, he said, well, we talked about what Bobby did. And I asked him, I said, is Bobby, did he, before he had the stroke, did he like the job? He said, you know what? He had a ball. He loved it. He loved doing that job. So I was like, okay, obviously Bobby had been in that role, but things had changed since he had the stroke. Would you want to do that then? If you want to manage 3 more years, be 70, do you want to do that then? He said, yeah, great. So we talked about, basically you're brave for life. What do you want to do? And he basically said, let's do a 5-year deal. Take me to 75 and just kind of reevaluate at that point, but he's not going anywhere. So, we essentially entered into an 8-year contract at that time, right? It was we put it to paper, all that stuff. Now, did we announced the extension at the big league level? That 5-year deal that's his news. That's how he wants to handle it, all that kind of stuff, right? I alluded to this a little earlier. It's his career, and he handles things how he wants to. I respect it. He's the one who's got to deal with questions and friends and family and all that kind of stuff. And it's not my place to speak for him, And when he was ready, and look, as things start to change or whatever, yeah, that would have been a conversation. It'd say, let me do it a year. I mean, I know we didn't have a great year this year, and we could talk about all the reasons and so on. But I mean, the level of success is incredible, and that's not to be arrogant about it, but obviously the Braves win 14 divisions in a row. Two guys that rightfully so are in the Hall of Fame. Yes, there's a World Series, but that's unbelievable streak in professional sports. And then from afar, I always viewed the Braves as very successful. I think a 12-year period after the 14, I think it was 3 postseasons in a row, 2 of them wild cards. I'm not exactly sure on that, but I think it was around there. And I thought that was successful. I never viewed the Braves as not competitive and not high-end and high-quality organization. Being in Toronto, being in LA, they just were always good. You never viewed them as anything but world class. And I don't think anyone felt like, oh, 3 postseasons in 12 years is awful. You have other clubs that weren't even 500 for over 10 years. And then you have this run of not only 7 postseasons in a row, but 6 divisions, a World Series, a Manager of the Year, a lot of adversity in terms of roster and health and this and that. Um, of course, we're all going to get criticized, players, front office, manager, but success has been great. So, look, he had thought about this a while ago, and a lot of the things he talked about. And then, that morning we talked a lot of things he talked about being in New York or his daughter, and that morning on Tuesday, he said a lot of those things to me, you know, and I said, and even I've been talking to him pretty much every day, and I always check in with him. How you feeling? What are you thinking? And he's like, I think it was a day ago. He said, or 2 days ago, he said, It's like the weight of the world has been lifted off my shoulders, you know? And that's not to say he didn't love every minute of it, wasn't competitive, and wasn't trying to win. And I hate speaking for him, so I'm not. I'm just reiterating what was told to me, you know?
What?
So,
Now, Alex, can I clarify here? Are you
yeah.
saying that he had a 5-year deal that he was deciding on? What are you
No.
talking?
We had a 5-year advisor agreement, right?
Oh, I got you.
Basically, hey, at the time in 22, look, I think I want to do this 3 more years. I'll be 70. Look, we're rolling, right? 5 divisions, World Series. Now we win 100 games. Now we sign all these guys long term, and we got all these young players, and everything else. Snit, we'd like to extend you. What do you want to do? You know? And I said, let's make it 3 years is a good number. That'll take me to 70. I think that's probably going to be it. And but that's his news, right? And that's way earlier, And you know, it was similar. I wasn't here at the time. What happened with Bobby was a similar thing. They talked about it much earlier. And look, obviously, we all know how Snit feels about Bobby and so on. And he's not saying he's going to end up in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Certainly, Braves clearly, but it's a very similar path. It's a very similar career path for this organization. And he's earned it. He's reserved that right. And so, I mean, that was it was, you want to do this? And we put an agreement in place. We put years, we put contractual terms, dollars, all that kind of stuff. I mean, so we had basically at that time, wasn't he wanted it, agreed to it, was excited about it. What was a 8-year working relationship with the Atlanta Braves contractually, 3 of those which were going to be to manage, 5 of them contractually, which would take him to 75, would be to be a senior advisor and so on. So, but again, that was his news to break or talk about whenever he wanted to. That's not my place. It's a private thing. And if things evolve or feelings change or whatever, and look, if he had felt differently, if a year into those 3 years he said, "Oh, I changed my mind and I don't only want to do it 2 years instead of 3," we would have adjusted. So if he had said, "Hey, I want to go 1 more year," we would have just added the 5 years to 27. Instead of starting, he has a 26th. So he always had something in place for 26 to 30. But it's not set in stone. We can have a conversation and change it. Maybe we bump it. Well, you want to do another year? We'll bump it to 27 to 31. So, and that's why when I did my media, I'm like, this is always an organic conversation. It's never been, God, we need to know. There's going to be a deadline, all this kind of stuff. He's going to take the time that he needs. I think he told you guys that too. I'm going to decompress and so on. And he said, I know I'm ready for this. This is the right call. That's why I've been checking on him each day, just talking about, we didn't get a chance to actually talk about the roster, staffing, all that stuff. And I wanted, obviously it happened pretty quickly. He tells me on Tuesday. We have the press conference on Wednesday. I wanted to give him Wednesday, but I said, we normally have our end of season conversation. We didn't have it, right? So I want to have it. So we talked about everything, and I'm going to continue to talk about him in this role too. I mean, I didn't know Bobby when I got here, but I remember the offseason of 17. I got the job middle of November, but I think we had the tender deadline, and I asked Bobby to come in to my office because I want to get his opinion. I didn't know the roster. I could look at them on paper and look at the reports and watch video, but I wanted to go through who the potential non-tenders were and who would he keep. He had really good, and at the time I was debating whether we should trade for Galvis with the Phillies because Dansby, I believe, led all shortstops in errors. And he said, I would not. He liked Galvis. We all did. I would not make that trade. I would stick with Dansby. Wash told me the same thing. We did that. And he told me I would non-tender these guys. I would keep so-and-so. And, it was interesting enough of all the guys. Luke Jackson's the one he said I would keep. And, he's had the longest career of that group if you look back to that offseason. And, and obviously I got to go out and see some games with him in the draft. And I've said this, Bobby was, I didn't know this about him at the time. He was a Hall of Fame manager, but unbelievable evaluator of talent. I just think back to conversations that I had in that 2018 season, and now I get to cross-check 3-4 years later. He was right about almost everybody. It's incredible.
So you didn't approach Snit then towards the end of the year and go, do you want to manage it? Do
No,
you
you guys had
for an
asked me,
extension?
you guys had asked me about, hey, have you guys, like when you guys, I don't know when I did that, sometime in September, you guys talked, like we never discussed it ever again. And it wasn't because it was, he was going to be like, he was going to be here, and it wasn't like we had this conversation and we had at minimum contractually in some form, a 2030 deal in place. So that can change. Look, even now, if he came to us and said, hey, can we change it? Can we make it, this or that or whatever? We'll have a conversation. He's going to be here. Like Bobby Cox is still an employee of the Braves. He's a lifetime employee, so I know he's obviously it's unfortunate with everything, but Bobby Cox had a employment, same thing. He had a contract in this role and whatever, and so it's going to
Alex,
be a similar path.